Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of The Other Side of Addiction. We are here with our special guest, Jackie Pack, who is the owner of Healing Paths. So Jackie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Good to be here.
Thank you. Thank you. And we are here with the lovely Janessa. Janessa, again,
Hello.
Thank you for being here with us and joining us. So today we're going to talk about betrayal trauma, which is something that we have not spoken about on any of our podcasts at all, which I think is very interesting. But before we get started into that, Jackie, would you just share a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I have been a mental health therapist for, I usually say 28 years, but I think I've been saying that for a couple of years. So it's probably like now I've kind of switched it to say 25 plus.
Okay.
And, you know, my first job out of grad school was working with substance addiction. I never saw myself going into addiction work, you know, but it was the only job I could get. And I tried hard. And I'm here, you know, all these years later, still working in addiction, which sometimes still surprises me. I also understand why I love it.
Really cool.
Yeah, I think it is very rewarding because, and the reason why I say that, because I'm not a therapist, of course, but to be able to come into the studio and be with the guests that we have had on this show, for me, it's very therapeutic, especially with my wife. She battled alcoholism. She's coming up on 19 months sober on the 9th of July. But I would have never have seen myself in the addiction world either. And now here I am, I'm doing a podcast, I'm speaking about it. I've been guest at recovery centers and shared my story. And, you know, I've been trying to figure out what my why is since 2009. And I have finally figured out what my why is.
Nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, when I started working in addiction, at the time, I didn't think that I knew any addicts. And so I felt a little bit like an imposter coming in to work with something that I really didn't have any personal connection to or fully understand. And I mean, I look back now on that younger self, I was like 25, and I have to like smile maybe at her naiveness. And the trail she had to go on to understand that my dad had multiple addictions going on. And I did not know, that was not confirmed for me until his funeral. But, you know, I grew up with an addicted parent with many addictions going on, which when I started to put some pieces together, started to explain a lot of my growing up years and what was going on in my family.
Yeah.
And it's tragic that, you know, he never addressed it. He never acknowledged it. And he died fairly young.
Yeah. It's, you know, when I first started sharing my story, Jackie, and I don't know, probably it could be the same thing with you, Janessa, but I was shocked how many people that I've actually known. And matter of fact, our guest earlier today, I've known her for quite a few years and didn't even know up until a few months ago that she battled addiction.
Yeah.
And it just shocks me it almost seems like if you talk about a family member or someone that you know that's gotten cancer, somebody will say, oh yeah, I had a family member too, or a friend or whoever. I have found it to be the same with addiction.
Yeah.
Wow. So betrayal trauma, I definitely want to know more about that. So please educate us, because I'm really confused what that means.
Okay. So I want to talk a little bit first. I have a couple ways that I explain it to. I explain it to both partners of sex addicts when I'm working with them. I also think it's important for their addicted partner, or if I typically don't work with both individuals in the coupleship, right? But if I'm working with an addicted partner, I think it's helpful for them to also understand what betrayal trauma is, and that their spouse or partner is not like overreacting, is not kind of like, you know, making this a big deal, or because it is a big deal, right? And so I think understanding that there are some things that partners of sex addicts experience that that are different than partners of other addictions or substance addictions, right? So some of those is, first of all, that betrayal trauma, and we'll talk a little bit more about that, but it feels very personal because, you know, sex usually or works best, I say, when it is personal.
Mhm.
And so it feels like a personal rejection. It feels like a statement about themselves. You know, it's also something that can cause some pretty serious health risks for partners. You know, also, unlike substances, we're not talking about abstinence as the goal because, you know, we believe that sex is an important part of relationships. It's a valuable part of relationships. And we want to move more towards healthy sexuality, balanced sexuality, instead of this addictive, compulsive sexual behavior. And then, you know, most of the research is saying slips and relapses are more common in sex addiction, which is really hard for partners sometimes to hear. You know, I get many partners who are like, I can't handle another relapse. I can't handle another slip, right?
Yeah.
And I get that. I understand that. It is extremely traumatizing for partners, you know? So I understand that. I think it's also, I usually will explain to both the addicted one or the betrayed one, the partner, that, you know, kind of like our immune system in our body, our immune system kind of is just operating in the background. For the most part, we're not aware that it's running unless it detects a threat, right? And then maybe we feel under the weather, we're not sleeping well, or we just feel a little off. And then we're back to normal, right? Or maybe we get really sick, we have a fever, we're down in bed for a couple of days, which says our immune system is working. And then once we're recovered, right, it kind of goes back into the background. It just kind of operates without us really having to be aware of it or do anything. So similarly to our immune system, we also have a threat system that's operating in the background, right? Immune system is looking for like a physical, biological threat. Our threat system is looking for more like environmental threats, right? Like, is that like, you know, sometimes I'll say, I mean, more often than not, females relate to this example. If I say, if you're, you know, walking alone at night, or you're going to your car and all of a sudden you realize like there's not a lot of people around, and oh, my car's by bushes, and I start to like, my threat system starts to rise a little bit because there's a potential for danger, right? And so it has to prepare for that threat. Now, if I get in my car safely, that threat system can kind of like go back down and be like, okay, we're fine. So our threat system also kind of operates in the background. And then we also have our attachment system. That's not something we're necessarily always conscious of, but it's running in the background, right? And based on how our relationships from birth on have gone, that attachment system can either work fairly well or it can have a lot of problems. So I'll just talk about and say, like, we have a threat system, we have an attachment system. Often, one of the ways that our body figures out that the threat has ended is that we're back among family members, right? Like, if you think about not being safe, or, you know, and we somehow get out of danger, we're back with our loved ones, we're back with our friends and family, and they're all like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad you're safe, I'm so glad you're here, you mean so much to me. And for our system, we're kind of like, okay, that's an end to the threat, and now we can return to safety, right? So what happens with betrayal trauma is one of our attachment figures, and usually a significant attachment figure, is also in my threat system. And that can be really hard to reconcile those two, because the people that I turn to kind of like signal to my body and my brain that the threat has ended is the very person who I don't feel safe with, or who has caused the threat in the first place, right? So our nervous system can get stuck in a loop. And that's kind of the impact that betrayal trauma has on partners. And so I think it's important to understand, like, this is not something they're necessarily choosing any more than, you know, when we detect a threat and our system starts to respond, we're not choosing that. Our system is designed to detect that and respond appropriately, right? And so it's very similar with betrayal trauma in that, like, they're not quite sure how to resolve that threat, because the person they want to resolve it with is the one that created this trauma for them.
It's a big inner
Wow.
battle.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, because you could probably really relate with this.
Yeah,
right?
I
And
know
what
everything you're
she's
saying. I'm like, yep, that's exactly it. My husband had a sex addiction for, well, all of our marriage, and I didn't know about it until our first was born. And anyway, it's exactly that. It's that, I love him, and and I trust him, or I think I trust him, but like I turn to him in everything I do, but then he's causing all of this chaos and this uncertainty and this hurt and pain and insecurity in myself. And it's this battle that it's exactly what you said. It just, your system doesn't know what is going on, what's up and down.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And even if they start to do some things that we notice feel different, feel safe, then we're like, well, you didn't know that before, and look at what happened. You thought you were safe before, right? So sometimes even improvements can be triggering that trauma and that reaction internally.
Yeah, because you're like, is that real, or are you just trying to pull one over me again?
Yeah. So often with betrayal trauma too, partners experience a lot of personal shame about it, right? Like, whereas I think with other like substance addictions, it impacts partners for sure. But society doesn't look at them and say, well, what did you do? Like, did you not have enough sex with them? Are you, like, are you not whatever, right? And so we can tend to, hopefully not in the professional arena, right? But we can tend to look at partners as creating the sex addiction, which is just not accurate.
Yeah. When I remember when we were first in recovery or trying to find something to help, we would go to our, at the time we would go to our bishop, which is not a therapist, but they would be like, oh, well, read, these passages of scripture, and you need to give him more sex. And I'm like, what? It just seemed so messed up in my head. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, things seemed fine before, and even when we have sex, he still will relapse. Like, it didn't make a difference. So
I think that's one of the surprising things, right? Is that partners or sex addicts themselves start to learn this really isn't about sex.
Yeah.
Like, that is the vehicle with which my addiction manifests itself, but it's really not about sex.
Yeah.
So it's like a drug and alcohol addiction, and basically it's just a Band-Aid, right?
Yes. Yeah. It's I mean, we talk about, we define addiction as a maladaptive coping mechanism. Like, it's not the root cause.
Right.
It's a symptom of something bigger, right? We typically need to stabilize addiction behavior in order to go back and get to root causes. But the addiction itself is not, the root cause.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember we had been in recovery or in therapy for I don't know, been 3 or 4 years, and he kept relapsing and relapsing. And I'm like, there is something we're missing. Like, yes, we're learning new behaviors, new ways to cope, but there is something we're missing. It's huge. And I remember listening to actually your podcast, Mother of Meshed Men. And I was driving when I was listening to it, and I pulled over to the side of the road and just sobbed my eyes out because I couldn't drive. I was like, this is it. It like resonated with me so much. And so I think after that, I like anyway went to that Worth, I don't know, was it with Amy Smith? I think she did this women's or she did a women's conference, a workshop. Yeah, there we go. Okay. And I went to that, and that was huge. And I remember kind of diving into that, and then we got into the the stuff with Ken Adams and stuff, and that was huge. That was so pivotal in our recovery. And once we faced that, and my husband went on the retreats and everything,
Mhm.
and he's that was it. That was what was the root cause of it. And
Mhm. Right.
and once he was able to address that, and obviously it took a couple years, but he's been, I mean, we're almost 2.5 years of sobriety for him. But that was it. That was the key. Like you said, it's not the sex, it's not the pornography, it's the underlying thing, you know?
It's most often a relational injury, right? Like we're dealing with attachment wounds, which I would say is probably happening with substance. I think that's happening with addiction, right?
Mm-hmm.
Sex addiction maybe is more clearly a relational issue.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting. I haven't heard it like that before.
I hope this is an interesting question. We've had people on our show, guests, who they're a couple and they've both battled addiction.
Mhm.
Have you had couples that have battled the same addiction?
Yes. Yes.
Really? Boy, I bet
Uh-huh.
that's interesting.
Yeah. They don't always, I would say most often they don't come in that way. They come in with one identified as the addict and one identified as the partner. And with work, we start to see, oh, there might be an addiction here with the other one. There might also be a sex addiction. I think, you know, for females, there's not a lot of resources for female sex and love addicts.
Mm-hmm.
And it does look different.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I have not seen statistics on this because I don't think the research is being done on this. But I would say 100% of the female sex and love addicts we've seen at our clinic have sexual trauma in their background.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard for them to identify with that label of sex addict because they think the person who abused them is a sex addict, which again, no, they would be a sex offender, right? Which is not addiction. Like, but those labels can get confusing to the general population, right? So they don't always pick up that label. They don't see themselves that way. And so it can, you know, it can just be a while before we start to see that in therapy and start to understand it. You know, sometimes with clients, and this happens with some of my male clients, they don't want to pick up that sex addiction label, which, and I also tell them, like, that's not the official label. Like, that's not a diagnostic term. That's a population term, right? Like, that's what the general population talks about. So I'll say, let's talk about intimacy disorder. And they might pick up intimacy disorder. They resonate with that. They understand that. And then eventually they start to understand that they can see that also through the addiction lens.
Well, that's interesting.
It's interesting. The labels we put they have a really big impact on whether somebody gets, you know, chooses to get help or not, because I'm not that.
Right.
Well, and you're labeling yourself. So like in AA, there was a time when I was starting to really get things. And I made a post on my Facebook years ago that says, you know, the words that follow I am follow you. And when my wife was getting up and talking, or when she'd announce her name and say, hi, I'm Janan and I am an alcoholic. And I remember going home one day after an AA meeting and I says, I would really like to suggest that you don't say I am an alcoholic. Use something different. Do not label yourself as an alcoholic because you're telling yourself you're an alcoholic. To me, it was danger. And so now when she gets up, she goes, hi, I'm Janan. I'm in recovery. That's how she says it. And I'm like, see, that's a better label. I mean, because you're saying you're working towards, you're not still this person. You know, yes, they say.
And that can be an active label, right? Like I'm in recovery. That is maybe going to look different the years that I am in recovery, but it's still true, right? Like it's not like, oh, that was me then and now I'm somebody else. Like I'm still in recovery. It looks different, you know, 5 years in, 10 years in, a year in.
Yeah. You know, and something I found really interesting too, Jackie, is I think it was our third or fourth show that we did last year. We had Hollywood movie star Breanne Davis on our show.
Okay.
And she wrote a book, My Sex and Love Addiction, My Hollywood Love and Sex Addiction. And somebody mentioned her to me, and I found her on Instagram, reached out, and she came on our show and was sharing what her addiction, you know. And I was shocked when she said that over 50% of sex addiction is now women more than guys. And most people see it as guys. And I'm like, no way. I'm like, it's always been like a huge number for guys. And she goes, no, actually women are starting to pass the men in sex addiction. And I just scratched my head just going, what the hell's changing then? I mean,
I have always said for every male sex addict, there's probably a female sex addict. Like they're not all acting out with the same woman.
Yeah.
Right. But I think that also speaks to the complexity of female sex and love addict, because our society has a lot of stigmas around women who want to own their sexuality. Right now, I would not say an addiction is owning your sexuality.
Right.
And a lot of times, like I said, if there's sexual trauma behind that, you see yourself already as maybe a bad girl. And so I live that out, right? Like that good girl status that society wants to only see women through, that's gone. So, and I didn't choose to take that away, right? But that's gone now. And so here's the path that I can chart for myself.
Wow.
Because you hear a lot that, you know, if a woman acts out like that, you're like you said, she's a bad girl. But if a man, it's like, oh, men will be men, you know?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
And
right. And we don't think of her as a mother. We don't think of her as a person, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Again, it's that label society
Mm-hmm.
puts on things.
Yeah.
And I think that also makes it difficult for partners.
Yeah.
Right. Because we can talk about how, you know, women are just overly emotional. They blow things out of proportion. They can be hysterical. And then in that language, we're missing the fact that this is actually a physiological thing that happens to their body that they did not choose, or they are not choosing to behave that way.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's spot on.
Did you have a question? I thought I saw you.
Yeah, it's a little off in a different direction, but I didn't want to interrupt this flow.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I had this one. I've over the years, as my husband and I have been open about our recovery, I've had a lot of friends and even people that I don't know just reach out to me and be like, hey, you know, who do you recommend? We're struggling with this too. And a lot of the question that I get asked, and given I know what helped for my husband and I, but in general, I don't know. But it's what is the difference between codependent behavior towards the addict? And given this can be for men and women, but I see it a lot more in women just because I have a lot of women reach out to me. But what is the difference between codependence and compassion? And how do I know which one that I'm showing towards my husband or my spouse? Because they're like, I want to be kind and compassionate and help him, but at the same time, I feel like I'm enabling him. I'm making it worse, and nothing is changing. If that makes sense. So I get that a lot, and I'm like, I know what we did, but I'm just curious.
I mean, probably like you, I don't think there's a one size fits all answer to that, right? So, I mean, codependency in its origin, I mean, it came through the addiction field, right? Like the mental health field did not have that word until the addiction field added that. And initially it was looked at like, you know, kind of, I mean, and some partners, I'm just going to give this disclaimer right now. Some partners really did not identify with it and found it to be quite offensive. And I can see that, right? It does not fit all partners, but initially codependency was kind of labeled as, you know, we have an addict and we have another partner who is addicted to the person needing help, right? So the addiction is somewhat serving a purpose for both. And if we pull out the addiction for, the addicted person, that partner doesn't quite know what to do, right? And so they kind of, are in a dynamic where they look for people who need them. And that can, be an addict, like somebody who they can kind of rescue or they can pull out of or try to help, right?
Yeah.
And I do see partners like that. Like, I think partners could fit that label, but I think the term codependency has changed over the years, as it usually does. When we initially apply a label, we're going to see it shift and evolve, and that's usually a good thing. So when I talk about codependency, I mean, obviously for partners, I will say, look, when threat comes up, our human response to threat is to want to control things. Because if I could control it, I eliminate the threat.
Yeah.
So that controlling behavior makes sense, although it can come with a big stigma for male partners and female partners, right? Where like, if I get told one more time that I am controlling, like, I'm going to lose it, right? And I'm like, well, you are controlling because this other person is out of control, right? It's not going to work, like, because you can't make them sober. You can't make them care about this.
Yeah.
And, so sometimes I will say, look, we need to, initially we start with effective boundaries. And sometimes it can take a while to get those effective boundaries where the partner is not trying to control the other person through their boundaries, right? And the boundaries are actually just for themselves. And when we start to put in place effective boundaries, we begin to see if, this might work. Other times we start seeing this is not going the way you hoped it would. And then we're in a grieving loss process, right? Which they're already in, like, this isn't what I pictured. This isn't what I imagined for myself. So boundaries, and again, sometimes it can take some time to dial in those effective boundaries. Most addicts do not respond well to boundaries. So sometimes we're having to tell partners, like, you have to give yourself permission. Like, they are not going to give you permission to have your boundaries.
No.
Like, I will give you permission, but you need to give yourself permission. Like, boundaries are healthy. Boundaries make things more functional. So that's where we start to see if that's going to work. And unfortunately, not all addicts and not all sex addicts want to change or see that it's a problem or care that it's really hurting somebody that they have said that they loved.
Yeah. When I was telling Al in the episode we were doing earlier that I've noticed with some of the women that have reached out to me that a lot of the time they won't push those boundaries, or I guess set certain boundaries, and say, I'm going to get help regardless of what you do. You can come with me or you can stay, but I'm going to get help, because they're afraid that they're going to say, well, see you later then, I'm not going to go with you. And I think maybe that might, I don't know, not for all, but some of them, it's like, I'm afraid to do that. I don't want to chance that. So I'm not going to get help, or I'm not going to set boundaries.
I would say too, that is different for female partners and male partners.
Okay.
Male partners are more willing to put those boundaries in place. And I think part of that is, I think all of my male partners have been the primary earners in the family. Whereas sometimes for female partners, if they leave me, I haven't worked. I've been working at home, raising children and building this life that we agreed we were going to have, right? Yeah, so if you leave me, I'm homeless, I'm poor. How do I take care of my kids? And that is a real issue that a lot of partners face. So that can be one of those obstacles. And I will say, do not set a boundary unless you are willing to maintain it.
Yeah.
If you're not, you cannot use it as a threat.
Yeah.
If you are in a place of walking away, then we can set a boundary that says, if this, then this. But if not, don't just jump there because you think you should be there, right? Yeah. There's other boundaries we can work on, and maybe that gets some traction.
Yeah. And I think boundaries definitely, I've seen it be abused a lot. Like it's like
Yes.
more of a punishment
Yes.
mentality versus this is just keeping me safe.
Yeah.
So
That's how it was with me. So I threatened to divorce my wife many, many, many times. And I jumped on the hamster wheel and kept doing the same things over and over and over. And I actually had a friend of mine going, well, how does that work for you? And I'm like, it hasn't worked worth a shit, but I still keep doing the same thing. And I threaten divorce all the time because I'm like, well, if I threaten divorce, she doesn't want to lose me. So that'll work. Well, I remember after the probably 100th time that I said it, she goes, you've said this so many times. I know you're not going to do it because you haven't done it.
Mm-hmm.
And I went, oh my gosh. And I did file divorce 3 times and canceled it 3 times. But with talking about the boundaries, that is one of the hardest things with us being on the other side, is to really stick by those boundaries. Because when I finally started doing it, I would find myself being really, really strong at it at times. And other times, it's like testing the water with your foot to see if it's warm and it's cold. It's like, I'm just going to test it a little bit. Pretty soon I would find myself in flipping cold water,
Right.
because I didn't stick with it. And it's really hard because you love that person. I mean, both of us, we fought for our spouses, we stuck with it. But man, it's hard because I know in AA, they teach them to set boundaries. Well, I didn't realize I had to set boundaries too.
I didn't know what boundaries were.
and triggers. I didn't realize I could have triggers as well.
Right.
And then also what I learned that really helped me a lot too, Jackie, and you probably see this, when I did stick with my boundaries, I also learned that my communication had to change while I stuck in those boundaries. Because when I first started really staying with my boundaries, there was still stuff that was happening, chaos. And I realized it was also because I was not communicating in the proper way. My communication was a threat and degrading and making her feel crappier than she already felt. Once I changed that communication and stuck with my boundaries, and you said it, Janessa, you can either come with me or not. When my wife came up to me and finally said, you've changed. I'm like, no, I haven't. She goes, no, you've changed. It's almost like you're getting on with your life without me. And that's exactly what she said. And my comments to that was like, babe, I want you to jump on this train with me if you want to. But if you decide you want to stay back and continue to do the things that you're going to do, I can't live my life like this anymore. So you have to decide whether you want to stay behind or you want to jump on the train. And by the grace of God, she jumped on that train with me. And, we're still continuous, probably like you and your husband, we're still continuing to work on our relationship and our triggers. And because we dealt with it for so many years, we know it's not going to just disappear overnight. It's going to take some time. It took time to get us to that dark nastiness. It's going to take us some time to get out of it as well.
And I would add, I think, when you were saying I had to change my communication, I would add to healthy, effective boundaries also require us to become very aware of ourselves and to start getting vulnerable. We've got to be communicating about what's happening inside of me, right? And that, again, if this person is in my threat system, that can feel like the last thing I should be doing. And yet it's that vulnerability that, it's not the shaming, it's not the threats that can wake somebody up. It's kind of having somebody just be vulnerable and say, this hurts me.
Yeah.
And this is what I feel. And this is what I thought we were, right? Again, not all addicts are going to respond to that. But vulnerability and that openness in communication is probably a better chance at the relationship surviving and both of them doing their work.
Yeah. Because with like what you said, Jackie, being vulnerable, to me, it really started opening my wife's eyes. It's like when I first started doing this podcast, she's like, I don't want you to do this. The only reason why you're doing this is because you're making me look like crap and blah, 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 blah. It was all about her.
Mhm.
And then she happened to come into a studio one day and watch one of our shows. And when we were heading home, she goes, I've been wrong. Do not stop doing what you're doing. And as now she has been a guest on the show as a guest co-host, her and I both were interviewed on this show to where we both shared our stories. She has seen me do speaking engagements. She's heard where my life was at. And by being vulnerable, she is like, babe, I knew I was putting you through a lot of stuff, but I had no clue I was putting you that far down in a hole.
Mhm.
No
Mhm.
clue. So it's really opened her eyes because, and I think you even said it earlier, Jackie, many times when I was getting on her and yelling and upset with her, she's like, what does it matter to you? I'm not hurting you. I'm only hurting myself.
Mhm.
I'm not hurting you, because it was
Mhm.
all about them. But once you start opening up and being vulnerable, as long as, of course, they need to be sober, because when they're still in that addictive state, they're still all about them. But that's when she really started realizing the pain that she was causing to other people, and the ones that she loved the most.
Right. And oftentimes that pain lies in a story, usually I tell all addicts, like, look, there is a story here that is going to make sense of everything. I don't know what that is for you. We're going to figure that out. But there is a story that makes this make sense.
Mhm.
And most addicts come at it like, I am somehow wrong. I am somehow unworthy. I'm bad. So to be like, wait a minute, you think this is going to make sense? Yes. Yes, it is going to make sense. And I'll even say that to partners, like, this is going to make sense, right? Because I mean, it's hard to say to partners, like, I hear a lot, the messaging here in Utah for partners is, you did nothing wrong. You don't have anything to look at. Like you are fine, right? Which I don't think we should blame partners at all, right? But I just don't know that our country produces that many healthy adults. So for me, I'm always
Yeah.
like, there's probably something there to look at.
Oh yeah.
And that's why I like the recovery messages, because I think most Americans need recovery from something, right?
Mhm.
Like, we have got a lot of issues. We've also got a lot of ways to escape and numb those issues. And so I think, it can be kind of delicate to turn that to partners and be like, hey, not that you caused this, not that you're to blame or that you should fix this, but since you're coming to therapy, let's kind of look at your story too and just
Yeah.
see how these things cross paths. Because we know that if both people in the coupleship get into recovery and do their own work, the relationship has a much higher chance of succeeding, and the whole family system can be much healthier.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I remember that realization when we were in recovery. I remember being like, I hope this works for him. This is his problem. I don't know why I'm coming. And I was so mad because I was like, this isn't my problem. It's his. But I remember it like hit me like a ton of bricks one day when I was kind of digging deep into my stuff. And I'm like, my gosh, I have just as much work and recovery. It just looks so different from his.
Yes. Yep.
And that was huge. And once I realized that and took responsibility of that, and it took a good year or more into recovery for me to finally see it. But once I did, oh my gosh, like it changed things drastically for myself
Yeah.
and for our relationship.
Yeah. And I tell partners, like, again, if this relationship doesn't work and your addicted partner moves on and gets into another relationship, this addiction isn't going to be gone, right? Like, this isn't really about you. But also, if you don't do your work and this relationship doesn't work and you move on, you're not likely to move on to a healthier relationship.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You'll fall right back in the same
Yep.
cesspool, basically,
Yep.
right?
The same or the exact opposite, still very dysfunctional.
Yeah.
I had a friend that was going through recovery with me, and she'd always do that. Karma's a bitch. She's like, you will get right back into it if you don't work on yourself. But she'd always say that. So
Yeah.
Well, and I believe that's why, I mean, I've been married a few times, and I've married pretty much the same type of women every single time. It's that one that was having problems, had issues.
Mhm.
I'm the knight in shining armor, riding in on my white stallion, jumping off. I'm going to save you, girl. And it was the same thing every single time. And
Mhm.
I kept looking at relationships going, my gosh, am I really that bad of a person? Am I not a good husband? And there was a lot of things I needed to work on, which since 2009, I've been working on myself and also working on being a better husband. And I have found with my wife's addiction, which is hard to believe, but I have found more about myself than probably I think I ever would have if it wasn't for my wife's addiction.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Because I really found out who I was, my strength, and were things that I was doing wrong. You know, that's helped me, just not with her, but it's helped me with everyday relationships
Mhm.
and also how to look at life. So
Mhm.
I think I've shared this so many times, and I like to use it because it was so true. It's like that AA meeting I went to with my wife, and this guy got up and got his 10 or 15-year chip. And he says, every day I pray and thank God that he made me an alcoholic. And I remember looking at my wife and leaning over and going, that guy's effing nuts. Why would he be grateful? But then when you heard the rest of his story and you see where he's at today,
Mhm.
I'm going, oh, I get it.
Mhm.
Because you have dug yourself out of the depths of what's happened to you in your life, the trauma that you went through, and you masked it with drugs and alcohol.
Mhm.
You hit rock bottom probably 15 times in all these years, because your rock bottom seems to get lower and lower each time. But to see how they look at life now, it's just incredible. And that's why for me, it's such an honor to be in the studio with so many amazing people who have battled gambling addiction and sex addiction and drugs and alcohol addiction, because to me, they are some of the most educational, spiritual, and motivation people that I have ever freaking met in my life. And it's because they know how life is supposed to be lived. And it's because of what they've learned by going to someone like you, Jackie, and just understanding where life had taken them. So
Mhm.
yeah, it's pretty cool.
I often will explain to clients that through our childhood development, we should arrive at our young adult years with a pretty good semblance if things go well, right? We arrive at a young adulthood with an idea of this sense of self. We have a sense of self. We aren't born with that sense of self, right? We're kind of reliant on the people around us to reflect that to us. And so if things go well, we arrive there. That's not going to serve us the rest of our life, right? Because the first 18 years of life are very different than being an adult. So
Mhm.
there's still things to discover and life experience to gain and things to learn about you, both good, bad, otherwise, right? We have to be able to learn those things about ourselves. And we use ourself quite often in determining, what do I want to do? What do I feel like? What do I want to eat? Like all those things we kind of say, where are my limits? We need a self to know those things, right? Now, if things go wrong, we don't arrive at adulthood with a sense of self, right? Some of our mental health diagnoses are really about like, I have no sense of self. I'm aware I have no sense of self. And it is highly distressing psychologically not to have that. I kind of say, like with addiction, often with trauma, right? Addicts arrive at young adulthood with some fringe sense of self, but it's usually a negative self-image.
Mhm.
And so a lot of recovery, right, is figuring out, who are you? Like,
Mhm.
this is not who you are. Like, here's messages you were given, here's ways that you were treated. And of course, as kids, you decided that was about you, or not decided, like that's how it felt to you. It felt like that's about me, right? And so a lot of recovery is understanding how I arrived with this negative self-image, and then kind of taking a risk and saying, maybe actually that's not true. Maybe there's somebody else in there and I just need to connect with that and figure that out and have help to guide me, right? And discover who I am. So I kind of see that's where addiction is and that's where recovery is, right? But I also think, I don't know how many people actually arrive at adulthood with a kind of solid sense of self, right? I think, and so I think a lot of people in their adult years are looking for a substitution for self, because it is very distressing psychologically not to have that self, right? So I can look for a substitution. I can look at religion. I can look at politics, right? Sometimes I can look at my addiction as a identity, right? Although I think sometimes addiction also serves the purpose of numbing or escaping the fact that I don't know, like there is not a self there.
Yeah.
And so also for partners, right? Partners usually have been trying to keep everything righted, right? They're trying to keep the ship upright. And that can feel like a self. That's not a self, right? The roles that we play in our life, I find a lot of times men kind of use work as a substitute for the self.
Yeah.
That's not the self, right? Like, but we can use those roles that we play in life as a substitution for self. It's going to run its course at some point, and we're going to run out because those were never meant to be identities.
Yeah. And it is really, I think that was probably one of the hardest, it still is for me, hardest parts of recovery is realizing you don't have a self without that. I remember when my husband started, he wasn't relapsing, and I don't know, all the stuff came up. It's like there was more safety because he wasn't relapsing as much. So if I feel like all this stuff was coming up for me that was like, now you can deal with this, you know. And the hardest one was when people would ask me, what do you like to do? I have no idea what I like to do. What are your hobbies? I don't have any hobbies. I have hobbies of, you know, going to therapy and checking my husband's phones and, you know, and like, you know what I mean? Like it was all revolved around him, and finding out that I had no hobbies. I didn't know what I thought. I didn't know what I wanted. I didn't have something for me to look forward to and to do. Like that was heartbreaking for me. I'm like, gosh, I'm like in my late 20s and I have no idea what I'm doing in my life.
Well, I think, go ahead, Jackie.
I was just going to say, I think for women, the socialized messages are very much like your noblest way of being, right? Or the greatest thing you could be as a wife and a mother, which again, I tell clients, like there's, I don't know, 100 ways to be a good mom. But like, unless you know yourself, you're not going to know which one works for you and which one feels true to you, right? Like there's a lot of different ways to be a good spouse, but who you are has to play a part in how you do that, right? And so we have to explore that, because sometimes we use those labels like, you know, wife or husband or mother, father, and it doesn't really tell us how to do that.
Not at all.
Well, I think Jackie brought it up earlier too, about how we fall so deep into the addiction. You know, JD told me once on a show that I was addicted to my wife's addiction. That was my life every single day. And I didn't have any hobbies either. I mean, I was going to the gym, but that was my release. I mean, I needed to release whatever was building up inside of me, and it still wasn't enough. But yeah, you lose yourself, just like they've lost themselves. You end up losing yourself. So, well, let's take a quick pause right now. We're going to take a quick commercial break, and then we'll be right back to hear more about all this stuff. It's been amazing. I love the first half of the show. So guys, stay with us. We'll be right back.
Have you ever been in a car accident? Do you know what to do after being in a car accident? Are the insurance companies going to take care of you? Hi, I'm attorney Rick Heaton with the Law Office of Bobby Udall. I will help you through the process and answer all of these questions. I give every single client my cell phone so they can talk to me whenever they need. Let me deal with the insurance company so you can focus on getting better from your injuries. Call me at 385-330-0226. Again, my cell phone number, 385-330-0226. Don't call the insurance company first. Call attorney Rick Heaton at 385-330-0226.
This is Gregory, owner of Lift Up Concrete, proudly serving the Wasatch Front for the last 12 years, lifting sunken flatwork for both residential and commercial applications. Only fully trained professionals lifting concrete at your residence with the same quality of material and method used at every commercial job we ever do. Don't replace it, lift it. liftupconcrete.net, 801-792-4535. Contact us at liftupconcrete.net, or if you're looking for a complimentary quote, 801-792-4535. Again, 801-792-4535. Again, this is Gregory, Lift Up Concrete Lifting.
Hello, my friends. This is Brad Neufeld, and I want to thank you for tuning in to the Resilience Talk Network. You can listen to my show, Resilience, every morning, Monday through Friday at 8 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. On my show, we will be discussing what it takes for you to overcome the day-to-day challenges that all of us face in life, as well as some of the devastating ones that may lead us to feelings of hopelessness and despair. It's my goal to provide you with the tools and skills that you need to overcome anything that is thrown your way. To find out more about my show, visit our website at www.resiliencetalk.com. That's www.resiliencetalk.com. And as always, until we meet again, go for everything that you want in life and make it happen.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Other Side of Addiction. I'm your host, Al Richards, and we are here with our special guest, Jackie Pack. So again, Jackie, thank you so much for being with us. Loved our conversation at the first part of the show. And during the commercial break, we were discussing about what we would like to talk about here in the second half. This will probably perk a lot of ears up. So we're going to talk about sex.
To talk about sex.
Yeah, let's talk about sex, which I find as a very interesting topic because, especially here, probably in Utah,
Very taboo.
it is taboo. I mean, but again, people aren't being vulnerable talking about different things. It's that, monkey see, monkey hear type thing again. So I'm just going to hand it over to you before I start going in too deep.
Okay. Sounds good. One of my daughters, when she talks about when she was in, I think it was the 5th grade. I mean, my kids are just like, we just grew up talking about sex. Like it was just like, we didn't know it was taboo. Right. And she's like, yeah, when I was in, I think it was the 5th grade and they were learning about hexagons. And so the teacher was asking like, what shape is this? Right. And somebody said, it's a hexagon. She's like, I'm pretty sure it's a sexagon. And they were kind of like, no, it's not. And she's like, I'm pretty sure it's a sexagon. I was like, oh, I'll have to apologize to your teacher and just let them know that that's a common word that you would have heard versus a hex. So,
Yep.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
funny.
I don't think we do ourselves any favors by not talking about sex and not talking to our kids about sex. But I also, I have a lot of friends, I've talked to a lot of neighbors who don't quite know how to talk about that with their kids, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I will say to them, like, have the conversation in the car without your kid there. Like, the last thing your kid wants, and they will pick up on, is if you are uncomfortable when you're having,
Yeah.
like, you can say all the right things, but if you are like, nervous and
Awkward. Mhm.
awkward, they're going to be like, this is bad. I don't want to talk about this. Right. So
Mhm.
I'm like, just have that conversation, get so used to it that when you actually have it with your kids, it can feel like just another conversation. Right. But I think also, we live in a world where I don't know that we figured out healthy sexual messaging. And maybe, right, maybe that should best be decided by individuals. But I still think we need some like ways that we can talk about it, or options for parents to learn, for people to learn, so that then we can decide personally, right? So, a lot of times I will talk about different emotions and socialized messaging, right? So I will say, and I say this to regardless who is my client, right? Maybe they're a member of the LGBTQ community, or identify male, female. But I would just talk about, like, from very, very young ages, we start to give messages to our kids that are going to impact them later in sexual relationships, whenever that starts, right? And one of the things when it comes to emotions, I will say, we give the bulk of emotions to women. Women get to feel them. We will make fun of you for feeling them, and we'll dismiss you for being emotional, but you get to have them, except for two, right? And those happen to be the two that we say, men, these are the ones you get. You get anger and you get sexual desire, right? Women should be desirable, but we have stigmas around women who can own their own sexual desire.
Yeah.
And we don't really like angry women, although I think there's a lot to be angry about if you identify as a woman, right?
Yeah.
So I will say, like, again, for men, and if you grew up in a high conflict family, you may be very conflict avoidant, which means any emotion you feel has to go through sexual desire. That's not going to work very well. Like, and so, I may hear him say, like, I'm just a very sexual person. And I'm like, we have sex drives, right? I don't know that it's more than anybody else, but if you're needing to overuse your sex drive because that is the method in which you were given to express or feel emotions, then that's going to sound or feel like a very sexual person, right? And if we're in heterosexual relationships, then we're with a woman who can't have her own sex desire, right? She can be desirable, but doesn't necessarily know what that looks like for her. And the focus can be on the male, right? That's not usually going to produce the most satisfying or fulfilling sexual relationship.
Yeah.
So, I say, I think most people need to do work around the sexual messaging they got or did not get, which is a different message, right? And to try to figure out, like, where does that land for me? Who am I, right? And I think it can be dangerous to explore things when we don't have it, to explore sexual things when we don't have a self. Now, that doesn't mean orientation issues, right? Most people with, that do not identify hetero cisgender, right, knew that or had feelings around that at a pretty young age, and maybe denied that or pushed that away because that wasn't a self that was acceptable, right?
Yes.
So not talking about exploring that, right? If that's a genuine, authentic part of who you are, usually we do the opposite. We kind of push those messages about self away. But a lot of times we are going to be uncomfortable looking at sex and understanding the messaging we got, how we interpreted that, how we started to integrate that, and then what that looks like.
Yeah.
I like how you said earlier, Jackie, I think at a younger age, as parents, to be able to talk to our children comfortably, because I tell you what, kids are learning more, or they're hearing more at a much younger age. I remember growing up as a kid, at recess, you always wanted to go to the monkey bars to watch the girls because they wore dresses. And if they hung upside down, you got to see their panties, but we have two granddaughters 10 and 7 or 10 and 8. And I was talking to my daughter about a month ago, and she said that our oldest granddaughter came home and shared something that one of the other girls, who is 10, one of our granddaughter's friends. And my daughter was like, Dad, the hell is this? They're 10 years old. How do they know this stuff already? And times have changed. And I'm so grateful that, so my son-in-law and my daughter sat our 2 granddaughters down and they had the sex talk with them. Now, my parents didn't, or my dad didn't do that with me till I was hitting like puberty, about 12, 13 years old. They've already had it. And I asked my daughter, I'm like, well, how did they handle it? And she goes, well, Lila, who is our youngest one, said, why are you telling us this? But they wanted to get that message out to them very, very quickly. And also to let them know that, and pray that none of this ever happens to really anybody, but it does happen, that it doesn't matter if it's a family member or a friend or a neighbor, whoever, if they touch them inappropriately, do not be afraid to come and tell somebody, tell us, even if they threaten you, you need to tell us, you know.
Which also means, like I used to say to my kids, like, we don't keep secrets. Like secrets, because a lot of times if there's abuse going on, that's kind of the language to keep the child quiet, right?
Yeah.
I will talk about, like, secrets hurt people, whether it's like friends whispering and you don't know what's going on, that's hurting, like that hurts, right? Like secrets, like I would tell my kids, like, we can have confidentiality, right? If you come to mom or dad and you talk to us about something and you don't want your siblings to know that, that's confidentiality. Confidentiality is okay. We can do that, right? We can have surprises, Christmas, birthdays, like it's a surprise. It's not a secret, it's a surprise, right? So finding other language and just kind of saying secrets hurt, right? But every so often I would check in with them like, hey, have you been told any secrets that you need to let me know? You know, this is how I found out that, you know, we would say, like, you can't eat your food on carpet. And so I found out that whenever my mom came to our house and babysat our kids, she totally let him do it, right? And I would be like, oh, okay, yeah, grandma doesn't think she needs to keep the rule. Thanks for letting me know, right? I got a lot of secrets that were somewhat insignificant, but my response was also like, thank you for telling me that. That's great, right? So that when then they do come across something bigger and I've asked them to tell me, they already have a history of telling me things. Right? They already have a history of like, oh, this person said this and this person did this and they said that was a secret, right? Like I got a lot of like 6th grade, junior high gossip, right?
Yeah.
But it was just about like making them comfortable telling me secrets and me having an appropriate response so that when something larger happened, which I mean, the current statistics pretty much say by the time a child turns 18, 100% of them have seen porn. They've been exposed to it.
Yeah.
So it's going to happen, right? That doesn't need to freak us out. We need to say, do I have the relationship with them that they'll talk to me about it? Like that was my goal as a parent. Like I want to be able to compete with Google when it comes to sexual messaging and have my kids actually feel better from our conversation than what they find in a Google search.
Yeah. And I love that you said that, Jackie. I really do. Because I grew up being afraid of my dad. So if something happened, I built my relationship with my dad on lies. But of course, if he found out that I lied, man, I got my butt whooped. So when I got old enough and I started having kids, and I ended up having 2 daughters, but I always told them I didn't want them to be afraid of me. So I always told them, look, you come to me no matter what, and I promise you I will never lose my temper on you. Because if I did it one time, they would not ever come to me again. And I wanted them to be upfront and honest with me. I mean, I even told them, look, if you want to try drugs or alcohol, fine, go get them, come home, I'll do it with you, you know, to let them know. And I'm really grateful that I had the experience that I had so I could change it with my daughters. Because I remember when we were divorced, my wife and I, or their mother, and I went to go pick them up for a weekend. And on the way to the house, my oldest daughter, she was 15 at the time. And she goes, Dad, when we get home, there's something we need to talk about. And I'm like, oh, okay. So we get to my house, we go in the bedroom, we shut the door, and she goes, Dad, you told me I could come to you with anything. And I said, yes, I did. And she goes, and you promised you would never get mad. And I says, I will keep that promise. And she goes, well, Cody and I were in love. And this is a guy that she's been dating since they were like 13 or going together or whatever. And she goes, so we want to have sex. So I want to go on the pill. I'm like, oh shit, how do I handle this? You know, and I says, well, have you talked to your mom? And she goes, yeah, Mom freaks. She come unglued on me, but she told me that she went on the pill when you guys were dating and she was only 15. And I'm like, oh my hell, why did she tell her that? But anyway, long story short is we had our conversation, and I'm very glad that my daughter was able to come to me and not be afraid to talk about something that so many people are afraid of talking about, and also getting mad at their kids. And she ended up waiting. She didn't go. And I told her, look, if you absolutely feel like you need to, if your mom won't take you, Dad will take you, and we'll go get you on the pill. But really, you want to be a professional dancer in that, I think you should probably wait down the road. And I started really thinking about the girls that got pregnant in junior high and high school. And this is nothing against our religion as LDS, but I realized the majority of them were girls in the LDS religion.
Yeah.
And I remember talking to my dad about it once, and and this was his theory, not saying it's right, but he says the reason is because they don't want to talk about it. They don't talk to their kids about it. So what are the kids going to do? They're curious. They're going to explore. That's the reason why those are the ones that end up in trouble.
They're too afraid to talk about it.
And I think the statistic came out in 2018, but 1 in 16 females reported that their first sexual experience was unwanted.
Wow.
We have an issue with sexual messaging, right? Part of that, Janessa, you mentioned that boys will be boys. And you know, I've worked with clients before when they've been raped and they haven't recognized it as that. They've recognized it as, well, he couldn't stop, right? And so we have to have conversations about consent. The conversations we have about consent are lacking in our culture, right? And that is why we're seeing sexual assault cases rise on college campuses. It's why, like, I don't think we take sexual assault and rape seriously enough in this country, right? And we do have to be having better messages with our kids, male or female, about sexual consent, about healthy sexuality, about, you know, what you can expect and what you can expect. Like, if, you know, sometimes I will say, like, if she says yes and then decides, no, I don't actually want to, she gets to change her mind. And that does mean you have to stop. You can be frustrated, you can be disappointed, you cannot be mad at her. Like, you have to respect no, right? And I talk a lot with clients, whether it's about consent or even, Al, I was thinking this when you talked about, you know, possibly like that you filed for divorce 3 times and canceled it. Like, I say to couples, like, look, I think we are afraid of divorce, and for maybe valid reason, although I think we are better because divorce can happen. You know, we have a long history where people could not get divorced, and that did not work out well. We did not have good marriages, right? So, but I will say, like, if no is not an option, I don't know that we can actually say yes, right? If yes is the only answer that's going to be accepted, that's a problem. So, you know, with some of my couples, I will say, like, it is okay. Let's have this conversation about, are we going to get divorced? Are we not? And let's not rush to that answer. I know you're going to be uncomfortable. I get it, right? But you guys will both be better served if you gave it some space and both of you decided, yes, I'm in it.
Yeah.
And there's some security in knowing that this person could have said no and they didn't.
Yeah.
Like, we sat with no, you know, for a month of sessions or 2 months of sessions. And at the end of that, we said yes. That is an informed yes. That is not a fine. That is not a whatever,
Yeah.
right? That is a, yeah, I often say like consent is a hell yeah and a high five.
Mm-hmm.
I love it. That's a good way of putting it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that means so much more. I mean, like you said, when they come out and they're like, yeah, we're staying together because it's hell yes and a high five, you know?
Right. Like
How
not
much
that it's
more
easy.
powerful. Yeah,
Mhm.
exactly. Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. I back in college, I was dating a guy and he almost raped me twice. And I didn't see it, just like you said, I didn't see it as that. I saw it was my fault because he made it my fault. He made me feel so guilty about it. I didn't tell anybody for months. And I remember going to a therapist and telling her about it years later. And she's like, oh my gosh, he basically raped you almost, like right there. And I was like, what? Like it made me angry, being like, what? Not that, like, I'm not, like, that didn't happen to me. And she's like, no, it did. And it really shifted it for me, because I was like, you know, she's like, you weren't okay with it. You said no, and he still kept going. That was huge for me. And so now when I tell that story, I say, yeah, I was almost raped, but some people are like, oh no, you know, it was your fault or this or that. But it was just like you said, like, I didn't see it as that for years and years. And it ate at me, and it really like destroyed a lot of me, because I thought I was a bad girl for so long.
And I, you know, when I think about being a therapist, like in 2017, I think it was 2017 when the Me Too movement broke, I was a therapist, right? I was leading or co-leading men's groups. That became a common topic of discussion with my male clients in our male groups. And I mean, many of them had realizations about themselves that were hard for them to sit with, right? And to be able to navigate like the nuances of that, to be able to have them accept some accountability, you know, even if it was in their men's group, but to still see themselves as a good person, or like, I didn't know what I didn't know back then, right? And really to have productive conversations that, for me as a female sitting in those groups, right, I was like, okay, like there is hope. There is hope. Like, I mean, this is a group of male sex addicts, and they're talking about some of their past behavior in not the best way, right? But they are having conversations that actually, as a female, give me hope.
Wow.
And I think that's important. Like when they're talking, when they're figuring out who they are, when they're navigating topics that are as complex as sex and intimacy and relationships, and to be able to have productive dialogue, I'm like, okay, this gives me hope going forward.
Yeah.
That's cool. That's definitely probably got to make you feel really good that you are starting to see it's a shift. It's starting to happen, but it definitely takes a lot more. I mean, more than just you and other people, right? It's something that's got to snowball and just continue to grow. So, well, we want to respect your time. So Jackie, we're going to take another quick commercial break, and then we'll come back and we'll wrap this up.
Good morning, this is Leticia with Computer Hospital. We are your computer repair experts for both PC and Mac. We are your community resource for all of your computer repair needs. What makes us different is that we want to fix your computer. We also do free diagnostics. We charge a flat rate labor, which means that you won't pay by the hour. All of our computer repair is done in-house with a fast turnaround time, and same-day service is also available. Feel free to stop by anytime without an appointment. We're located in Sandy at 8721 South State Street. Again, that's 8721 South State Street, or call us at 801-987-3993. Again, that's 801-987-3993. This is Leticia with Computer Hospital, and we look forward to seeing you soon.
Hello there, this is Brad Neufeld with the Resilience Talk Network, and I would like to introduce to you TAFFY, one of our newest sponsors. Let me introduce you to Derek.
Hi, I'm Derek from TAFFY. We're proud sponsors of the Other Side of Addiction podcast. TAFFY is a family-owned and operated business still operating in the Salt Lake City area for over 100 years. We manufacture some of America's best saltwater taffy.
What makes TAFFY stand out from all of the others?
We have a unique recipe, a whipped-style recipe that incorporates egg whites, evaporated milk, real sea salt. It's a unique product that is flavorful, melts in your mouth, and the best part is we probably have a flavor for anyone's liking, a flavor for any reason, for any season. We have unique flavors like chicken and waffles, maple bacon, frosted cupcake. New this year was a pineapple ghost pepper flavor.
That's awesome. Where can people find out more about TAFFY and all of its products?
You can check all of this stuff out. All of our products are available for sale on taffytown.com. We ship for free from our website, so all of our pricing on there is shipping included. Oftentimes we offer special promotions and discounts to our loyal customers, so do be sure to sign up for an account, and we look forward to seeing what we can do to make you smile with our taffy.
Where are you located?
We are currently located at 9813 South Prosperity Road in West Jordan, Utah, just at the foothills of the Copper Canyon Mine.
Derek, taffy has always been a great gift to give. What are some of the creative ways TAFFY can help say thank you to others?
Yeah, if you're looking for gift ideas, whether to say thank you to friends or family, or maybe to your clients after such a difficult or successful year that you've had, you could look no further than to get a gift idea from taffytown.com. We offer pre-packaged gift boxes that say that it's saltwater taffy from the city of the Great Salt Lake, and it tells a little bit about the history of our community and making candy for so long. You can also do customized gifts to pick out just the right flavors or colors of candy for that special someone and deliver even a personalized message in that box to them. So please feel free to check out taffytown.com for any gift ideas this season.
Thank you so much, Derek. Please visit taffytown.com, that's taffytown.com, to find out more about the products and services that TAFFY offers. You won't be disappointed.
Do you know someone who's gambling with death due to an addiction? Do you know someone whose life is being turned upside down due to a loved one that's battling with addiction? Hi, I'm Al Richards. I am the host of the Other Side of Addiction podcast. I started the podcast due to my wife's battle with alcohol. Let's just say I became addicted to her addiction. Our podcast is helping people understand a little more about those who have battled addiction and those who are hurting from their addiction. Through raw vulnerability, we share stories that help uncover the root causes of addiction. Shame felt on both sides, matter of the conscious and subconscious mind, continued beliefs, and often confusing paths of recovery. We collaborate with real people and their stories, as well as licensed professionals, to help our audience gain a better understanding of addiction. You can find us on Resilience Talk Network. You can also find us on Facebook at Mr. Al Richards. That's Facebook at Mr. Al Richards. You can also find us on YouTube. Just look up the Other Side of Addiction podcast. Hey guys, welcome back to the Other Side of Addiction. We're here with our special guest, Jackie. So Jackie, oh my gosh, this has really been an incredible show. And Janessa, I'm sure that you like it because this is kind of like in the topic of, you know, what you and your husband have gone through. So
Yeah, it's been awesome.
I'm really glad that you were the co-host today. Well, Jackie, and thank you for finding Jackie though,
Yeah.
and asking her to come on the show. So really, yeah, this is great. Jackie, is there something that you would like to leave with our audience? And if there is, please share it. And then also let us know a little bit more about Healing Paths Recovery.
Okay, so let me think for a minute about like a parting thought. So I'll tell you about Healing Paths. So we have an office in Bountiful, Utah. We have an office in the downtown Salt Lake area. And most of us are CSATs, which is a certified sex addiction therapist. We are trained through the organization ITAP, so IITAP, which stands for the, International Institute of Trauma and Addiction Professionals. And so most of us are trained with that. A few of our therapists have also been certified as partner specialists. So ITAP also trains partner specialists. And there's another organization that the acronyms are APSATS, APSATS. I always forget what that stands for, but they specialize with partners. Now, many CSATs also get the certification as a partner specialist. And so that's kind of what we're doing. We look at it from an attachment lens. We look at it through a trauma lens. And our goal is to help our clients work towards a balanced, healthy sexuality, healthy relationship, so that they can have meaning in their life and meaningful connections, right? I think we operate kind of on this myth that like we can be a whole person all by ourselves. I think we need to work to be whole people, but there's something about connection, right, that brings out a different side to human beings. And so I think that's a myth to say we don't actually need connection. I think connection brings out our better sides and brings out some of the most meaningful moments of life. So I would say that's kind of our approach to things. We work from a relational perspective. Many of us are trained in some of the couples modalities that are out there in our field. Like I said, we're CSATs. We're also partner specialists. And then all of us have one or two or a couple of trauma certifications. So we kind of approach it with that three-legged approach. Wow. I think, I would say, I don't know still what my final thought is. I think I would just reemphasize that whether you are experiencing betrayal trauma, or your partner is experiencing betrayal trauma, understanding that it is a real thing, right? It has biological components, it has emotional components, and it doesn't have this like choice component, right? This is happening in the body, and the body is going to do what the body is doing, right? Whether the brain says, no, let's not go there, or that's bad if I go there, the body is going to respond if it is in threat. Mm-hmm. So I think just understanding that, maybe learning more about that, Janessa and I were talking about, there's not a lot of resources out there for partners. There are some. This is the book that I start partners in, Moving Beyond Betrayal by Vicki Tidwell Palmer. Really, she's got a 5-step boundary solution. Like I said, I think working from, if you've experienced betrayal trauma, it starts with boundaries. And I think her book covers great stuff for understanding healthy and effective boundaries. The other one we use for partners is called, why can't I remember the name? It's by Dr. Stephanie Carnes. And it is about, I'm blanking on the title, but if you Google her, I know it's on Amazon. If you Google her, it's going to come up. So those are kind of the 2 books that we start partners working in. And I would also say, while not all couples recover from sex addiction and are successful at maintaining their relationship, it is possible. That's probably one of the most common questions I get from partners is it even possible? Yes, it is possible. There's a lot of factors that go into whether or not that's going to happen, but it is possible.
Yeah, and it has to be done by both.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Right. You just can't sit back and just let that individual just do the work by themselves. It has to be done by both.
And you need professional specialized help.
Yes.
Yeah. And I'm glad
Yeah,
that you
I would
said
say
that.
your general mental health therapist, they may know some things about sex addiction. They are not skilled in the nuances of sex addiction.
Nope.
You know, it sounds like it's something that every couple should take, whether there's an issue or not, really. I
Mhm.
mean, to learn more about one another and where you each stand.
Yes.
I would think it should be mandatory. Is there a way to do that? Make it as you get married, you have to have a mandatory
Therapy
therapy session, like 8 weeks worth
Maybe,
or something?
you know,
Mhm.
maybe instead of registering for wedding gifts, you can have a therapy fund that people gift you.
Yeah. Yeah, right.
I know. My husband and I say that all the time. Like, when our boys get married, we are going to send them to a therapist for a while to see
Mhm.
if this is,
Yeah.
know, the relationship they really want to go and what the heck it entails,
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
I've told my kids as they've grown up, right? Like, we have 2 savings funds for you. We have a therapy savings fund and a college savings fund. Both are educational.
Mhm.
Yes.
And very important.
And then I tell them, and if I need to go to therapy with you, I will own whatever. Like, I am not a perfect parent, so I will go, I will listen, I will take accountability.
There you
Mhm.
go. I love it. And you have a podcast called Addiction and Recovery, right? So
My podcast is
No?
Thanks for Sharing.
oh, okay. Okay. So how would somebody find your podcast?
We're on most platforms. You know, if you have, I mean, there's different platforms for whether you have an Android or an iPhone, but we're in most of the podcast platforms.
Okay. And what was the name of it again?
Thanks for Sharing.
Okay.
And I cover all things. I mean, it's a pretty broad topic for me. I cover all things, you know, recovery, relationship, all that type of stuff. So
Okay. Awesome. Again, Jackie, oh my gosh, thank you so much for taking time out of your busy day to spend it with Janessa and I. We are very grateful and blessed to have you on the show today. And we also want to say thank you to Brad and Resilience Talk Network for allowing us to do our show here in their studio. Check out the new website at www.resiliencetalknetwork. You'll find a number of other podcasts that all has to do with resiliency. So got some really good stuff. Again, guys, please share whatever you watch. Please share it with just one person. Just share it with one person. Ask them to subscribe. It really helps us out. And plus, it also helps get our guests noticed as well, because a lot of our guests are doing a lot of incredible work, like Jackie, helping a lot of people. So yeah, please help us out with that. And we're going to leave with this as we do at the end of every show. Remember, addiction is giving up everything for one thing. Recovery is giving up one thing for everything.